I wish I could say I started out with great success, but my first few deals were kind of miserable failures.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 19. Today, I sit down to talk with investor Steve Whitteberry. And Steve has been in the real estate investment game for quite a while now, and he's got a lot of wisdom to share with us on a lot of different topics that I really think are going to help make you money and save you money. And because there's so much for us to discuss, I thought I'd break our conversation into two parts. And really the theme here in these two parts is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're going to start with the bad and the ugly. And by that, I'm talking about those types of deals that sometimes seem too good to be true. And the people who will try to convince you that those deals are deals that you should actually get into. And Steve has gotten into some of those deals and found out that, yes, they were too good to be true, and he's lost some money on them. But things have turned out okay. And as you'll learn in our interview, Steve has learned from his mistakes and gone on to be quite successful in real estate investing and also in helping other people through some pretty tough situations. So Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Well, Brian, it's a pleasure to be here.
And you've had a lot of experience with real estate dating back to the 80s. Why don't you just kind of start from the 80s and what got you interested in investing in real estate in the first place?
Well, my first exposure to real estate is in the late 80s. A friend of mine was looking to either start a business or get into real estate, do some investing, perhaps have some commercial investments. And we were talking one night and he gave me a book by Robert Allen entitled Nothing Down, How to Buy Real Estate with Little or Nothing Down. And the book really intrigued me based on a conversation we had that evening. It got me to read the book, and I read it 2 or 3 times, and I was just intrigued of how Robert Allen would brag that you could drop him in any city in the United States, and within 30 days he would buy a property without any money. And I was just amazed by that. And I guess in a little way, because of my conservative nature of training in college for corporate finance and accounting, I was a little appalled by it, thinking, wow, that seems like a real risky deal. But the more I read the book, the more I realized that there was some real wisdom in the book and some things I needed to learn to understand it deeper.
Now, you're a CPA by trade, is that correct?
That's correct.
So putting on your CPA hat, I mean, just talk about that for a little bit. Buying something with no money down, what does that really mean?
Well, the first time I heard of it, I was very concerned because I thought, man, little or nothing down, that means you're 100% leveraged. How are you going to make your payments? How's it going to work? And what I realized is the trick is all in the cash flow. That by the time you fix up the property, if there's any repairs that need to be done, and then you start charging rent for the property, is the cash flow from the rent going to cover all of your carrying costs for your debt, your taxes, your repairs, insurance, all of those things? And what I found was that when you sat down with an Excel spreadsheet and did the math, it worked. That there is a way to buy real estate with little or nothing down, and that you can have it cash flow, and that's the key, is for it to cash flow.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think I mentioned in the first episode I did about myself that I actually saw Robert Allen at a Learning Annex seminar when I lived in Los Angeles, and he talked about the same thing, the no money down idea of buying real estate. And I know a lot of people nowadays that there are, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to buy something with no money down. But what he was talking about then, it seems to be a little different than what people are talking about now as far as no money down. Would you agree?
I would agree. I don't remember a lot from the book except 2 concepts that stuck with me like crazy. And the first one is the value of real estate, and that over the last 50 years, with the exception of the Great Recession from 2007 to 2012, real estate's gone up in value pretty consistently in most parts of the country. And that's pretty intriguing and very important to investing in real estate. The other thing that really struck me was the fact that he talked about in those cases when you do invest by putting money down, and I would advise most people you need to have a good down payment because you need to make sure that you've got a stable asset. And I can explain that, what I mean by that later. But the thing that really connected with me is he said if you're going to spend money, let's say you spend $5,000 this year. If you spend $5,000 on a new sofa for your living room or new drapes or a new quad or a new boat, as soon as you get that asset, it's going to depreciate in value. And that if you have a loan on that, there's a really good chance that if you go sell that asset, you're going to get less for the asset than the amount of the loan. So you're going to have to contribute more to pay off the loan. If you do real estate correctly, if you have to liquidate that asset in 3 to 5 years, there's a very good chance that you will be able to get more for it than what you paid for it, number one. And number two, you'll certainly hopefully get more than what you have in the loan. So therefore, you'll be able to pay your debts. And that's always pretty important to me because I came from one of those conservative Midwest homes where the last thing you'd ever do is not pay somebody. If you owed them, you paid them. And so that's kind of ingrained in me. And so I like to set up every deal I have to make sure that whether it's the bank or a private investor or a partner, they all get their money back and that I'm not going to walk away owing anybody any money.
Right. So as a conservative CPA, would you? It seems like you would agree with Robert Allen's assertion about depreciation and how real estate, even though you can depreciate it for tax purposes, in reality it tends to grow in value.
Yeah, I really would agree with that. And that was even reinforced even further in my days in corporate America when I was helping a company in West Michigan buy land to build their retail stores on. And my boss said, I want you to buy the land so inexpensively that if one day after we sell it, we have to turn around, one day after we buy it, if we have to turn around and sell it, we'll be able to sell it for more than we paid for it. In other words, he says, I want you to get a good deal on this. I want you to look at places where it's going to be increasing in value. Make sure it's the part of town where it's going to increase in value. And so that stuck with me quite a bit in my real estate years.
That's similar to the McDonald's method, isn't it? Buying up the real estate.
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing about McDonald's or any other of the multi-unit retail chains or people who invest in real estate. Everybody thinks McDonald's is in the hamburger business. They are, but when you look at the value of the real estate that they own, it's incredible. And an experience I had the other day is I met a guy in Chicago. I was at a seminar in Chicago the other day, and I asked him, he said, well, I'm here to visit my uncle in town. And I said, well, what's your uncle do? And he said, well, he's president of Montgomery Ward. And for those of you who were around in the late 70s or early 80s, you remember Montgomery Ward was a store similar to JCPenney or Kohl's today, and they went out of business. And so I looked at him with kind of a quizzical look, and I said, what do you mean the president of Montgomery Ward? I thought they're out of business. And he said, well, their retail is out of business, but they have such a vast real estate holdings that it's still a very viable company and doing very well because of their real estate holdings. Because they had stores throughout the country in these prime retail locations that what they did is they closed the store, but now they're leasing it to other retailers. And it's a money-making machine, even though the retail store is long gone.
Wow, that I remember Montgomery Ward. That's funny that.
Well, I do too.
That's really amazing that they're still a viable company just because of the real estate. That's
yeah,
great.
and that just inserted into my brain the importance of real estate and buying it right and holding it for the long term, that there is a lot of value there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the direction we're going to head in this conversation, Steve, is kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, because you've seen all of those. But I want to take it in reverse order and kind of start with the bad and the ugly, because you've got some stories from early on in your real estate investing that I think the listeners will find quite interesting.
Yes, Brian. I wish I could say I started out with great success, but my first few deals were kind of miserable failures, even though you would think coming out of corporate America, I would have had a better brain on my shoulders, better head on my shoulders, and wouldn't have avoided some of these mistakes. But, I think it's important to realize that we all make mistakes, and we just have to get up when we fall down and get back in the game. And my first venture into real estate was with a gentleman, I use that term rather loosely, and when you hear this story, you'll understand, a gentleman in Michigan here who, this was in 2004, 5, and 6 when real estate was going very well. But at that time, he was still helping people with foreclosures. And what he would do is find people throughout the state of Michigan that were going through foreclosure. He would bring an investor in like myself, and we would help buy them out of the bank so that they would not lose their house to foreclosure. And I would, in essence, become the bank as the investor.
So were you putting up cash to pay off the bank loan?
Yes, we were putting up cash to pay off the bank loan.
At full value?
It was usually at full value because he would have an appraisal done on the property. And so, for an example, it might be a value in those days of $50,000. They might owe $20,000 on the loan. So we would put up $50,000. We would pay off the bank of 20, and this gentleman who introduced me to the deal would keep the 30. So he would keep the difference, and now the owner of the house, instead of making payments to the bank, would now make payments to me. Well, that all sounded good, except when you stop to think about it, if you can't make your payment to the bank of $500, how are you going to make your payment to me of $600? And every time I would ask that question, he would say, well, they've got a new job, or they've got more income, or they received an inheritance from their relative or something. And so I did 6 deals with this guy and lost money on 5 of them. And I learned a lot from that area. Number one is don't go all in until you've held 1 or 2 for a while and see how that one works out. Don't go in 5 or 6 deals with somebody. Start off with 1 and let it ride for 2 or 3 years and see how it works, and then do your second or third one with them. The other thing I learned was because these houses were all over Michigan, they would be 2 and 3 hours away, and I did not have a management company involved, a property management company, so I would have to manage something that was 2 or 3 hours away. That was extremely difficult.
Now, did you find yourself managing it while the resident was still living in the house and still paying you as the bank?
Yes, because you still have to collect the payments, and if they got behind, then you'd have to call them or you'd have to visit them. And
so you were driving all over the state collecting your monthly mortgage payments.
I was driving all over the state collecting some monthly mortgage payments, and that got to be very difficult.
What would happen then if they were unable to pay you? What did you do then?
Well, in most cases, I would have to end up evicting them, rehab the property, and then sell the property because it was a couple hours away.
Were you selling it at a profit or a loss?
In 5 of the deals, I sold them at a loss. In the 6th one, I sold it for a pretty handsome gain. I learned the hard way. It's very painful. But, I guess it's just one phase of my career that I don't like to talk about, but I think it's informative to tell other people so they don't make the same mistake.
Everyone out there who's in real estate knows the kind of deal that you're talking about. I mean, it's very easy to be convinced by someone who's very persuasive that, hey, they've got a great deal for you, and you're going to make a lot of money doing this. It sounds like this guy probably wasn't being as truthful with you as he should have been.
Brian, yes, in fact, he was investigated by the state of Michigan after a while because they called it equity scamming or something to that effect. They actually had a formal name for it. And it wasn't long after I stopped doing business with him. I think it was about a year later. He was actually investigated. I don't know if anything ever came of it, but as a result, he stopped doing what he was doing.
And have you run into any other investors who are out there doing similar types of deals?
Not to that degree. I've had people who are helping people out of foreclosure, but they have a much more ethical approach to it and are really trying to help people.
Mm-hmm.
We did have another unfortunate experience because I was in corporate America at the time and so busy working. I tried to make this as passive as possible, and my wife and I joined in a national real estate investors group where you could supposedly buy properties anywhere in the United States. And we bought a property in partnership with a lady down in Battle Creek, Michigan, and we sent her money for the rehab, and she basically stole the money and never did the rehab. So that was another very painful process that made me really examine who I was in partnership with, make sure I know them, make sure I trust them, make sure I know where they live, and so to speak, And since that time, my relationships in real estate have really improved, and I've got investors that work with me, and we have a great relationship. They always get their payment every month. They're very happy with what I pay them, and they're very easy to work with and allows me to, use private money to invest in real estate. So that those painful experiences in the beginning really set the table for me as a learning experience to know what to do right going forward.
Mm-hmm. And looking back on those experiences with the gentleman who was helping people or supposedly helping people out of foreclosure and the woman down in Battle Creek, what would you say were some of the warning signs that maybe you weren't paying attention to?
Well, I think one of it was I was acting too quickly. I think I had too much confidence, and I said, "Oh, this will all work out. It's real estate; it'll work out." And I didn't really sit down on paper and analyze the numbers the way I should have. I mean, you would think as a CPA I would have done that, but I was so busy that I thought I'd done it, but hadn't done it adequately. I think the second thing would be is bad partners. I just got into a bad situation with a guy who didn't mind lying to me and didn't mind really lying to the people he was helping in foreclosure. And that's unfortunate because for me, I've met so many good people in real estate that it was a shame that I met this guy as the first, bad real estate investor, if you would. But I think the good news is I didn't let it keep me from getting back into the game, that I overcame that first loss. And, for me, I also learned that if you're going to have property that's, an hour or two away, you've really got to have a very good management company that can keep tabs on that and take care of it. One of the best pieces of advice I'd ever received from a fellow investor, he said, I always invest in stuff I can drive by on my way to work. Because he had a full-time job, very successful, but he said, I have it so I can drive by it. If it's clear on the other side of town, 40 minutes out of my way, I don't invest in that type of property. I invest in the ones that are 5 minutes out of my normal routine of going to work in the morning, so I could just drive by and check on it whenever I want to. And then he also used a very good property management company to manage his properties. So, those are some of the really big things that I learned out of that painful experience.
Great. And I do want to go back to the guy who was supposedly helping people out of their foreclosure situation, because you did mention that there are people who do actually help, have ways to actually help people who are in a foreclosure situation. However, the guy you were doing business with was just making it worse for those people, it seems.
He really did.
Yeah. How would you, can you compare and contrast what he was doing with what a legitimate foreclosure expert would be doing for the person who's going through a foreclosure experience?
Well, I think the first key thing is if someone has a, say, for example, a $700 payment, you can't take them to a $900 payment and think that they're going to get out of their problem. You've got to somehow relieve, their payment issue or come up with a way to help that. And secondly, $30,000 of income for this guy to save someone from a $20,000 foreclosure didn't make sense. He was defrauding both really the investor and the people. There are a lot of good people now who go in and try to repair the credit of the people who are going through a foreclosure or help put them on a budget or help them find a way to get out. Or maybe there is some debt consolidation. They might have some credit card debt that 24% interest and things like that, if they can consolidate that, help them consolidate that into a lower interest payment, a lower interest rate, and perhaps either a slightly lower or maybe just slightly higher payment, then that would help. But in some way, it's got to relieve their overall total payment. When you add up their home mortgage and their 2 or 3 credit cards, you've got to find a way to reduce that and really help them out of their problem. And there are legitimate people in West Michigan who do a great job at that. Well, and there's other people in West Michigan who will just flat out buy someone's home if they're going through foreclosure, if there's any equity at all. We had that situation about a year ago where we bought a house on the west side of Grand Rapids, and we got a call from an anonymous person that said, hey, my neighbor said you bought their house. Would you buy mine? And I said, well, it kind of depends. I'd like to talk with you. My wife and I went down and talked with a husband and wife. He had lost a very good paying job, making $18 an hour. He was unemployed for about a year, and now he had a job making $11 an hour. And she said, there's just no way we're going to make our mortgage payment. And so we've looked at another house. Our kids are grown. We can downsize to this other house, but we need someone to buy our house. And she shared with us that night that she was 3 payments behind in her house. So the bank was talking to her. And so she said, would you buy my house? And I said, well, how much do you need to have for it? And she told us an amount. And, it was what I call a borderline deal, as far as, is it a good deal for me? And is it a good deal for her? But we went ahead and bought her house because it's in a location we really like. It's near a college. We love to rent to college students. And so in that situation, we got a house for a little below market, not a great deal below market, maybe a little below market. And we were able to help them out of their foreclosure issue to save their credit and get them a house where, they have a nice house now that they could afford on their new earnings. And it was amazing. We actually ran into her about 3 months afterward, and she was so appreciative of the fact that we'd bought her house and that they liked their new house. They were able to clean up all their debts and their credit. And so, that's one time I've done that. I don't think I've ever done that since, and that was almost by accident. But it turned out to be a win-win for both parties. And, there are people out there who do that consistently, where it's a win-win for both parties.
So, Steve, I think that you've done a good job talking about the bad and the ugly. And we're going to stop here. And next week, if you're willing, I'd like you to come back and talk about the good. And the good will include a conversation about self-directed IRAs and how in 2008 you started a new strategy of investing and how that's turned out for you. Can we look forward to seeing you next week?
I would love to come back. It's one of my favorite topics, and I'd look forward to talking about it.
Fantastic. We'll see you then.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.